fucking niggas since the fifth grade. Really ain't no difference if that nigga gay.
Blood satellite.
Anytime you're trying to pioneer in a new direction, you're going to lose a lot of money and make a lot of enemies. Now, I wasn't worried until I saw Mark Zuckerberg apologize. I wasn't worried until I saw him say, "I'm sorry, I got it wrong on this one." Because what he should have said is, you know what, it sucks, but this is the price you pay. You could say I'm sorry, but it's like, this is what it is. But when he said I got this wrong, that means they were expecting Meta to be, the metaverse, to be better than it was, which does not make me hopeful for its future.
Yeah.
Because what he should have said is, like, this is a 10-year project. And the idea is that Meta as an organization has the infrastructure, has the war chest, has the funds, the social capital, has just that, the permanence of a corporate entity that they probably could. And the fact, if they're saying whoopsie doodles, I'm like, oh no, because I don't know any other. Maybe Google could give it a shot, but I'm like, there is no other company with that much fucking credit that could have stayed the course on this thing.
Honestly, I don't understand how they, like, how it failed. I don't understand. It almost is comical how hackneyed every single example, every tech demo, every promotion of the technology in their system was. It was embarrassingly bad. And like, aren't they worth like billions of dollars?
Oh yeah.
Like a B level game developer could have come up with something more presentable on like a 10-man studio. I don't understand how it's even possible. And all you had to do was lean into the existing market for like consumer impulse buy apps and things like, you know, again, like Uber and Skip the Dishes and app games and all of this shit that already exists. You just have to onboard it. Like, it's, any idiot could have done this. And I agree with you as a prediction that something like Meta is going to happen. That's not a prescription. I think it's demonic. I think we should blow it up. But yes, it's going to happen. It blows my mind that of all the companies, like you said, they were the best positioned to do this. And somehow it's almost like they were trying to fuck it up. But I don't know what the angle is. So.
Yeah, I'm like, is it that monumental fuck up? Because it beggars belief that they could be that wrong. Because I see it, I'm like, this doesn't appeal to me. But I can't. Maybe it's not meant to appeal to me. Maybe it's meant to appeal to younger people. Whatever. You know, I'm no longer the target demographic of anything other than A24 movies. That's the only thing that's meant for me anymore. It's not even fucking video games. I get Scorn, and that's it. Everything else is weird, and to me, boomer shooters. I guess that's the one I get. But yeah. But so I'm like, okay, like I get the play here, but. You know, maybe it's good that it's not working out, but you know, I'm interested in the future of the development of these social media platforms. I think Twitter is pleading a good case for, like, we don't need to be slaves to advertisers anymore. And despite that being perhaps a problem for me, that's the way the wind's been blowing for my entire career. And I've been ringing the bell saying, you guys cannot keep relying on the social credit that these ad agencies have. No one likes ad agencies. There will come a day when they figure out how to do this without needing you fucking downtown cosmopolitan shitty snarky motherfuckers. And that day's coming. Yeah. So I hope people suffer, because these are bad people. Like, I don't want people to be upset that these people get fired, because maybe my proximity to it allows me to say that, because I know these are genuinely shitty people. I've met them. I hate them. I work with them now. These are people I work with every day.
Day in the life as a 23-year-old product manager at Meta. I always journal in the morning. I then do a quick workout routine. I get dressed. I try to look cute every day. Got some food at the office. I make a coffee every single morning. I need that. I did some work on the roof. Worked until lunch and then ate up there. Here's me being cute. I got a snack always. I then shuttled home. The view's so pretty.
You're just losers, but you're also entitled, and you're also egotistical, and you also complain. Like, I never complain about clients. Never. I always see it from their perspective because that's my job. I'm surrounded by people like, don't they realize that they're kind of being demanding? Of course they're fucking demanding. No one who runs a store would say, oh man, these customers are really demanding around Christmas. Yeah, that's what you're fucking there for.
Yeah.
What life do you think you deserve? So everyone who was fired from Twitter thinks they deserved to live like a king.
Yeah.
For sending emails every single day, and maybe it's not their fault, but fuck it, I don't care. If I was fired, I would laugh. I've been fired.
No, I mean,
before. It was hilarious.
Same. One of the big criticisms that we've had of them, like watching these videos of these women who do fuck all, right, is that they behave as though they're elites, and of course they defend themselves kind of passively. That no, we're not elites. We deserve these jobs. This is the future. I have a very good education. You should be happy to see women of color in business. But then actually, no, you are elites because you do fuck all. And now that you're fired, you have no excuse. You already know that you don't do anything and you're still mad. And now, and the sad, frustrating thing is that many of these people are going to go on to get jobs in government or at other tech startups. It's like the fucking Peloton guy, if you heard about that after losing everybody's money, hundreds of millions, that he's now running another company. He makes fucking rugs now. And somebody just dropped 25 million on him. Just here, have it. It's like after you lost everybody's money, just go ahead and start a new business with no idea what you're doing, no experience in the market whatsoever, and here's 25 million. Just a cool 25 mil. Fuck that shit. Fuck that Jew. And like, but these are the point is they're oligarchs. They are the elite. They're a completely different class from us. So fuck them.
Yeah. The story...
Laugh when they get hurt because they're laughing as they've been hurting us.
Here's how this whole industry works. Psychopaths dare to be retards. And then the lower half, the people we were talking about at Twitter, they're retards and they pretend to be elites. They dare like that is you have this societal glut, that whole middle section of people whose entire job it is to send emails. And even on like job sites, like, you know, everyone's, oh, not in the trades. I'm like, do you know how many times I've worked construction? Do you know how many fucking lazy, do nothing assholes there are in construction sites?
Oh yeah.
Fuck off. We know there is. So it's not like any particular industry is mean to it, but there is like this section of society that are just dumb losers. And there was this, and you probably, well, because you live here now, but there was this drama in Ontario recently where the teachers went on strike. Not the teachers, the support staff for the teachers. There was a strike, and then they walked that back. And it wasn't because the teachers unions had gotten a raise. And this is about just the support staff in the schools not getting a raise. So who's the support staff? Well, that's janitors, that's IT guys. There's tons of support staff to make a school run. And I hate teachers, right? You know, we all do. But at least I know what the teachers do, and I can empathize. Or like, you know what? If I was a young teacher, I know what it's like to be put in a class with me in it. You know, like I was not a good guy to teach. I was a piece of shit. I did pranks and fucked around. Like I get there, but if you're an IT guy at a school, you don't actually deserve a raise. You're actually an idiot. You're actually a dumb loser. And I've known the IT guys who work at these schools, and they're lazy, and they're bitter, and they're entitled, just like the people we're talking about. So it's like it just moves around. You have this huge mass of people who don't do anything, but they're entitled, and they're elitist. And they're people who are in both of our families who have this fucking attitude. That's what the strike was about. It's like, well, the teachers got a raise. Well, schools don't run without us. You know what the biggest lie you hear in the restaurant industry? And I heard this when I worked in restaurants, and for a little bit I was a dishwasher, and they would say things like, you know, the dishwasher is the most important job in the kitchen. They said that to me.
Go tell that to the Chinese restaurants, which are the most numerous and also do not wash their dishes ever.
Yeah. Also, it's like, okay, like I know you're being nice, but that's a retarded thing you just said. But there are dishwashers who believe that. Like, I make this place run. No, the people who cook the food and serve the food make this place run. Yeah. They could just throw the dish, serve it on paper plates. Who gives a shit? And throw them out. But there's people who do believe that. and that they're the ones who are going to bring down society, because we're going to be running out of things for them to do. Like we were talking about earlier, it's like, we were talking about that Fisted by Foucault thing. It's like, we are being seen more as an impediment to the people who run society, and people like you and me are impediments because we're dissidents. But then there's just regular people who are truly useless. There's so many truly useless people in society, and we found a way to give them jobs that send emails that kind of keep this thing going. But if you disrupt that, the middle class is fucking useless. There's no utility to the middle class right now. We're just kind of keeping everyone busy so we don't have people starving in the street, and we can't even really do that much anymore. So what do we do? It's like, yeah, we laugh when they're laid off, but also it's like, well, where are these motherfuckers going to go? Where did like tens of thousands of these Twitter product owners go? Do they die in the street? It's like you find kind of make work programs, but I think that chicken's going to come home to roost, that we just don't. We have people running this country that don't know. I think they're going to look at human capital as less of an asset in the future, if that makes any sense. Or am I just talking shit?
No, absolutely. I mean, it's been this weird kind of up and down cycle where simultaneously, because of technology, the amount of productivity you get out of actual productive human capital is huge. But at the same time, that obviates a lot of people, and you have to keep them busy, and so you wind up with these sort of warm seat jobs. And so the value of all of that other human capital is close to zero. It's all over the fucking map. The volatility is off the charts. So I think there's room for a new system in some places, maybe not everywhere, where human capital, like almost a Landian thing, right? Where human capital is completely fucking useless and worthless, and nobody cares.
Well, and that's kind of where we're getting, and it is an issue of technology. Like, the fact of the matter is, we always have our sights set square on ideological things and spiritual things, but we often take our eyes off the prize of technology, that no matter what happens, technology is driving down the necessity of humans to do things. And what do we do about that? And that is why the bells are ringing for universal basic income, because a lot of people come to the same conclusion. It's like, well, there's nothing to do. What are we going to do? I don't go, just give me free money or I'll burn things. And that's kind of effectively what they do for migrants. That's why migrants come here. It's like, well, I need free money, or I'm going to burn things until I get it. It's like, okay, here, please go away. They're doing that to everyone. That's what everyone is all about. That's what the progressives are about. Like, well, why shouldn't everyone just get $3,000 a month? Just because, yeah, nothing. It's responding to this knowledge deep in us that this isn't going anywhere. There's no reason. They know if they feel like their vote doesn't matter. They feel like if they quit, the company isn't going to suffer. And both of these are true, by the way. They know their voice isn't being heard. They tried saying, "Hey, we should get nuked," and they didn't get nuked. So I can do whatever the fuck I want. I don't have any agency in this system. So, and that's kind of what, even on our side, the idea of the white strike, where it's like, yeah, check out of the system, get free money. Even Ann Coulter was talking about that not long ago, when Trump was coming up. It's like there is this true nihilism running through everyone. It comes out in different flavors, but I think it is responding to this, existential malaise or political malaise, where you're like, yeah, nothing I do matters here.
Yeah.
But maybe in the future that mutates into, what will the power structures use to make me shut up? And that's where you get into the Agenda 21 stuff. That's where you get into the you'll own nothing and be happy. And it's, yeah, there's a lot of people who would be happy. And, and we're on the side of saying that won't make us happy. Being comfortable and docile won't make us happy. And they say, oh, what? So you want strife and violence? And I have to say, you know what? Yeah, maybe. Because I have to be, right? If we are positioning ourselves against being, taken care of and happy and drugged up, I'm kind of on just the side of war, I guess, right?
Yeah.
I think there's probably another way for it, another way to say it, but I suppose I'm anti-peace.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's more like open conflict, like just a constant low hum of open conflict. Like there's this symmetry, there's a symmetrical response that runs alongside UBI. So the assumption with UBI is we have a massively economically efficient modern world, fifth industrial revolution, whatever, where a small amount of human capital produces so much surplus that we just don't know what to do with it. So let's give it away to everybody, all those poor people. And that seems fair, right? But the symmetrical take is if a small amount of human capital can produce so much surplus that it can save or support 1,000 people for the work of one man, then why do the 999 men deserve to live? In fact, why are their lives worth more than a cockroach, than a bacteria? What is the value of that human capital? If a single man can produce enough to sustain 1,000 men, and then there's 999 men out there that together can't even produce enough to sustain one, why do they deserve to live? At the very least, why do they deserve our protection? I mean, how can you argue that these people should be protected when in this world they can't even fucking feed themselves? Right?
Yeah. You know, this dovetails pretty nicely with the book I wanted to talk about because it deals just with this. It deals with sort of the downfall of civilizations. It gives quite a few examples. Primarily, it gives the examples of England and Rome. The book I'm talking about is titled The Law of Civilization and Decay by Brooks Adams, subtitled An Essay on History. But it's 230 pages. It's not an essay. It's just a book, buddy. He's trying to fucking be flip with me.
He's trying to pass it off on you.
Yeah. It's a fantastic book. This is a book that I'd considered even splitting into 2 episodes because there's so much to talk about. There's a lot of books we've covered on the show that are good, but no, I don't really remember them. I remember them, but I don't always come back to them. I don't always think about them. And this is one of those books that after reading it, I keep thinking back to it. It's one of these books where, there's some we cover where it's got a central thesis, it's got a point, and it kind of builds a case around it, but you can kind of gloss through the case. But then there's books where every single page has something fascinating on it and and it moves fast. There's no wasted lines in this. There's no wasted words. There's no fluff. Like when we read The Ancient City, I got the same sense from that. Like there's so much history packed into these pages. Every paragraph, there's something cool you want to write down. So this was one of those things. And it's fundamentally about trends that occur when a civilization falls. And we always go back to Rome as probably the best example, not only because it's the most large historical event of its kind. You could make an argument that maybe the Mongol Empire, but there's also such great documentation about it. There's so much bookkeeping. There's so much census data. We can really mine the history of Rome to get an accurate portrayal of what happened and the very specific social mechanisms at play that led to its downfall. I'll skip a lot of like the historical anecdotes. I'll stick to the broad strokes on this because there's a lot of good ones. So he starts off by talking about Rome, showing how kind of Rome rose and fell. And he says that Rome, since its inception, was primarily landowners and usurers. It was eventually overtaken by a moneyed class serving its own interests that led to its disintegration. And that's one of the central pillars of this, that typically at the height of a civilization or an empire, once there develops this money class, it seems to signal the disintegration of the ethnic / racial component and also what they would call the martial component of the people. And it ends up becoming this self-serving, corrupt thing that eventually falls down. He paints a very detailed picture of how this happened in Rome. He says over 300 years, nature culled a plutocracy from what had originally been a martial race. And he says, like, originally during the founding of Rome, the idea of a Roman was simultaneously a soldier as well as a farmer. The Roman was like a man with a family, and he had his land, and that's the blood and soil, and he had the ability to be self-sustaining and also operate in a unit, because every single one of these men was expected to call on to fight for Rome. So you had the atoms of the Roman civilization was the Roman, almost like a fractal version of this larger Roman idea. And that, like, even back then, even the tradesperson or the manufacturer was looked down upon, and landed magnates and landowners were the only ones that were seen as valuable. And he said slowly these like small landlords that we kind of talked with them in the ancient city started to disappear, and moneyed senators started emerging. So over time you saw like capital being held by individuals and on their land, and then eventually it starts moving to the cities, and eventually you start seeing these senators they were required to reinvest their money in the land. That's actually an interesting thing. So it's like, okay, you want to be a senator in Rome? Well, you have to give back. You have to start buying land. You have to become a landowner. You can't just be this, upper class person disconnected from the land. And that's an interesting thing. I bet a lot of conservatives would argue that is a good thing to do. But what that means is that government officials became the primary landowners. And what they started doing is kicking off these former landowners, and they're consolidating all their farms. And so you have this like giant fucking senator / landlord class. And then over time, over 300 years, you see these landowners in Rome, they start migrating to cities because they can't farm anymore, or they sold their land, they got bought out. And so they essentially become homeless people, they become slaves. And when people talk about the end of Rome, like, how did Rome end up being these two strata of like just these rich people, and then like 3/4 of it was slaves? Well, a lot of those slaves used to be former Roman landowners. And then they were dispossessed, like we were just talking about in the previous conversation. Like, I don't have my land, and I don't really want to fight for Rome. I'm going to go to the city, and I'm going to beg for money because I have nothing else to do. And eventually there's so many of them that Rome effectively collapses. And also the conquests of Rome. Rome starts reaching out and allowing more people from outside Rome to come in. Does that sound familiar? Does that sound like Britain at all? So you have, the replacing these regional husbandmen, that's what they were called, with foreign slaves of low vitality. And the people in charge, the landowners, they love these guys. Why? Because they cause less problems than the Romans. They work harder for cheaper. They don't even speak the language. Sound familiar? So you have these, like, the atoms of the Roman Empire, these men dispossessed. Now they're wandering around homeless, while a bunch of fucking foreign slaves are brought in, and then the elites are fucking celebrating. And you saw the same thing in Constantinople in the Byzantine Empire, because he said by the year 711, Constantinople was essentially an Asiatic city controlled by Armenians and Slavic slaves. Indeed, as the Byzantines loved materialistic wealth and commerce, their praise of God took on that of an Oriental king dressed in gold and glory. So that's another example of, like, as a civilization begins to fall, you have the emergence of this like class of people that are just there to be mercantile, just to have money, just to have power, and they excel at it at the expense of the very people, the very ethnicity. It doesn't need to be ethnicities, but that is part of it. But really, it's just, even in America, they would talk about this ideal American, the type of man who founded America that doesn't exist anymore, and that at some point became this like class of mercantile. I'm not even using this as code word for Jews. That's the trick. Now, Jews certainly exist in that strata, but there's no reason to believe that this kind of elite money class just needs to be Jews.
These could be mercantile in terms of just Silicon Valley elites. Like, it doesn't have to be Jews. I see what you're saying.
Yeah, he makes the case. So what does this all mean? What does the rise of this money class mean? Well, that usually means, in the case of Rome, once they start engaging in conquest and engaging in trade and flooding in stuff from the outside, that's when you have the rise of this mercantile trade class. And the mercantile trade class does not really have any connection with the individuals, the families, the ethnicities, whatever, that founded that nation originally. So he gives the example of the Franks, and the Franks opened up trade with the East, which, enriched Europe, of course. But what's interesting in this case is when you open up trade and you have this mercantile class start to develop, they tend to be run by a certain type of person. They tend to be skeptical. They tend to be materialistic. They tend not to be spiritual. And as they gain, they're interested in materialistic wealth. And what's interesting is, for the example of, let's go back to the Romans for a second. That type of husbandmen, the yeomen, as we might call them, they're not really interested in power. They're interested in the blood and the soil, their family, honor, fighting, vitality, these things that we talk about on the right. But they actually don't really care about just wealth accumulation. They tend to be more spiritual too. They tend to have a better relationship with the ethos of the land. And the moneyed class, the mercantile class, they just don't even fucking give a shit about that. And that creates a lot of blind spots for what he calls the imaginative people. So these types of people, the ones who are more spiritual, the rural people, the people who usually are the backbone of a nation or ethnicity, they're imaginative. They like miracles. They like spirituality. They have these highfalutin ideas. And they tend not to be as materialistic. And he makes the claim, he also calls them emotionalists. He says, history shows that the emotionalist falls to the mercantilist when on equal ground. So once the materialist or the mercantile person emerges, they take over in every nation it's ever happened in. That's the story of Rome. That's the story of England. That's the story of America. That is effectively the story of elites.
Let me talk about Brooks first. He theorised the cyclical rise and fall of civilisations in such a way as to denigrate his own era and exalt the Middle Ages. He was the grandson of John Quincy Adams and the great-grandson of John Adams, two presidents from earlier in the Republic. In 1895, he published a book called The Law of Civilization and Decay, and it was perhaps the first general theory of history ever attempted by an American. Brooks Adams argued like this: every age has a characteristic emotion, and various attributes follow from it. In the medieval era, the dominant emotion was fear. But from fear sprang a sense of piety in the face of God and an intense military vigour. And these were the characteristics which made the Middle Ages such an impressive era from his point of view. In particular, they led to the inspiring achievement of the Crusades. And Brooks Adams wrote this: in that age of faith, no such mighty stimulant could inflame the human brain as a march to Jerusalem. A crusade was no vulgar war for a vulgar prize, but an alliance with the supernatural for the conquest of talismans whose possession was tantamount to omnipotence. Pope Urban's words at Claremont when he first preached the Holy War have lost their meaning now, but they burned like fire into the hearts of his listeners then, for he promised them glory on earth and felicity in heaven.
Because when you think of an elite, you're not really talking about an aristocrat. You're not talking about a royal family, not really. You're talking about just usually businessmen, usually these people that are just kind of there, and they're important, they have money, they have influence, and they have all this capital, but that capital is free floating, right? And they become an organism of themselves. They effectively become a tumor in the body of this other thing that's going on. And they don't even necessarily need to be foreigners. Sometimes they are. And oftentimes they'll bring foreigners in because they don't give a shit. They don't give a shit about anything except accumulating power. And once you introduce money and trade in the situation, they have the ability, because they care about money and no one else really does, they take power before anyone notices. He makes a claim here. He says that the medieval Italians prospered because they lacked imagination, which made the northern people subservient to the miracle worker. of the Italians, the Venetians were the most cunning. So he's making a claim that if you look at Italian history, they were never as obsessed with religion and spirituality and Christianity really as much as the Northerners were, and they weren't really as pagan either. And because they were far more mercantile far earlier, that allowed them to develop with trade and with power and resource accumulation way more than anyone else in Europe. That's the claim he makes. So, and he says it right here, just to summarize: the law of civilization and decay is that when moneyed traders take over, everything falls apart. And he's got a quote here: in proportion as movement accelerates, societies consolidate. And as societies consolidate, they pass through a profound intellectual change. Energy ceases to vent through the imagination and takes the form of capital. Hence, as civilizations advance, the imaginative temperament tends to disappear, while the economic instinct is fostered, and thus substantially new varieties of men become to possess the world. Now, that is the central thesis of this book. It's that there's a new type of man that's born. Now, when we talk about Francis Fukuyama and the end of history and the last man, that sort of liberal sort of thing, like they truly do believe that a new type of man can be born from these circumstances. And in each one of these circumstances, in these modern nation states, you have a new type of man that emerges who wants to just be the sort of free-floating, capital-owning money guy. And again, it doesn't need to be Jews, because people hear this and think I'm talking about Jews. No. In many cases in England, a lot of these individuals would be, for example, the Tudors, or Oliver Cromwell would be another one. There's all kinds of figures throughout European history that were not very much anti-Semitic people could be doing this as well. He says, as merchants rise and lack imagination, they tend to hire their... Here's an example of how it goes. So they would have these sort of small trading outposts set in a place like Cologne, or what was the one? Champagne one. It was one in France. He says, as merchants rise and establish themselves, they tend to hire their own police and security, which means they kind of fund the state. You know, they're paying their own money to pay the state to come protect us, give us special security, which over time means that the state becomes more and more subservient to that class and the revenue that's provided by that class. So now the state says, these guys are special. We need to take care of them a bit more. And this is how cities become financial centers like Venice and Genoa, and how the money class ends up taking control because they are less connected to religion and culture. This is also kind of mentioned in The Accursed Share, and how the mercantile class is always seen as the other. And that's a trend you notice if you go through any... I don't want to speak too much to Eastern or Asian history, but I know throughout European history, the mercantile class was always seen as something lower, something different, something other. You know what I mean? Like, you know, for a time, like, they may even be seen as lesser. Like, you're just a guy who trades, but you don't till the soil, you don't make anything. Like,
yeah, it's you can see how if they were a minority within a normal one of those like base cultures, that they would be viewed as an outsider, and they would be given a lower role within society. Yeah,
and he says England in the Middle Ages mirrored ancient Rome in the sense that most of it was farmers. And all of England in the Middle Ages were effective soldiers, and that's a thing you see in a lot of, you know, serfdom societies and whatnot. Like the farmers knew how to pick up a spear and were often called upon. And he said he extends that to say nowhere has faith withstood the mercantile class, and he likens this to. He has this quote here: industry breeds heretics and agriculture breeds believers. And if you looked at the censuses that were taken by England throughout time, you would notice that, you know, the most religious people, we know this even now, the most religious people tend to be rural people. The true believers, even now, even in the Republican Party, who are the people who believe in this thing called America? It's rural people, it's conservatives, it's the rednecks and everything. And that's what's interesting, is to frame it like that's always been the case. And that might have to do with their rejection of power materialism. And there's one line I would always hear from people, even in the modern day, was that, oh, you're only a Republican because you see yourself as a temporarily embarrassed millionaire. Do you remember hearing that? They would say that about like people who are voting for Bush or even Trump.
Yeah.
They would say, "Oh yeah, you think you're going to be rich like him?" And I would always say, even back then, I'm like, no, I talk to these people and they don't. They actually don't seem to desire this lottery that you clearly desire. You want that because you're an urban person. And urban people, they become these materialistic, power hungry people, and it's kind of jarring to realize that there's huge segments of society that that's not even what they're interested in. That's not why they're showing up. That's not what they're voting for. And that was a pattern we've seen throughout history. Britain in the Middle Ages, like we said, it was very much like Rome. We had these freemen, the Yeomen, and similar to America too. And that America was settled by two types of people. They're settled by these like this type of martial class, and then also the capital owning urban people, the aristocracy.
Yeah.
And if you look at American history, there's a lot of interplay because they don't really like each other. But they got essentially chased out of England for a lot of the same reasons. And this is where we come back to the line that we said elsewhere in the episode, where in his estimation, it takes 3 generations for a new type of man to be born within the society. So it takes around 3 generations for this moneyed class, this new type of American to be born. And that's all it takes, really. And that's how he's got the data in here in the research, but that's how long it would take in Rome before the power is achieved. And he makes a point here, and with the rise of commerce comes the rise of skepticism, which triggered the Protestant Reformation. That's the claim he makes in the book, which encouraged less of a focus on material donations to the priest class and a focus on justification by faith. And this is kind of the whole schism between the Protestants and the Catholics, transferring the power to the Bible rather than this priest class and the intermediaries. And I know there's a lot of people who got opinions about that. But that's his claim, is that's essentially what that was, kind of rebelling against that. I think one of the best examples he gives in the book is the Anglican Church becoming subservient to the Tudors, and then all of these priests essentially becoming salary subservience to this new type of aristocrat. The idea that I can just be this free-floating aristocrat, and I'm no longer apart from the church, or the church is no longer above me. I just pay them to do whatever I want, which is kind of, you see that, and now you start seeing the birth of kind of Marxist thinking, the birth of the superstructure, that the capital owners can kind of pay anyone to do what they want. That is true, and that has happened throughout time. And I think he's just saying that's part of a cycle rather than a part of this eternal capitalism, which is what the Marxists would say. But yeah, so the example of the Tudors just owning priests, and then their political, machinations, their desires would just come out of the mouths of these priests at their convenience, and the priests just took the money, because what else are you going to do? He makes a claim here that I'm not sure about, but it sounds reasonable enough. He says, what you saw in Britain and what you saw in Rome, you actually did not see in Spain, because Spain never centralized like Britain did. And it never effectively left the imaginative period. And that's something I like in the book. Like, he draws this sharp distinction between imaginative and spiritual cultures and materialist commerce cultures. And this idea that you can look at different civilizations and nations around the same time. I know it's something like Spain, which never really embraced this the way Britain did. It still kind of remained spiritual. It remained in this sort of civilizational stasis for a lot longer. And then, Italy, which it kind of evolved this money class way, way early, and look at the centers of economic power throughout Europe, especially way, way, way in the north, in fucking, I want to say Antwerp. I don't think it's Antwerp, but there is everyone knows there's like a financial capital in like Scandinavia. And so, just to kind of summarize that, he says, as power centralizes, imagination is chased away by an economic class, and capital replaces imagination. The decline of empires always occurs with a sudden speed of expansion. So, near the end of the empire, you will see it start to expand, take more territory. And arguably that's what's happening in America right now. Like when we discussed from that article Fisted by Foucault. Yeah, well, basically in that article by Fisted by Foucault, where he's talking about how, this is the status quo. If we are looking at the American empire or the Atlanticist empire, whatever you want to call it, what it's doing is it's consolidating its power. If you look at the last few elections, it's really squashed what internal strife it had. There's no Black Lives Matter riots. QAnon's a joke. There really is no dissent. And what has effectively happened is America has got Europe under its heel, and it might very well be taking out Russia. So the American empire, and everyone's charting the course of the American empire, like it's expanding at such an unprecedented rate. Well, it's not really unprecedented. This is what every empire does. And as it expands, and as it might very well gain more by conquest and gain more capital, land capital, and influence throughout the world. But you're going to notice it doesn't get any better inside of America. The more America wins, the more it succeeds on the global stage, there's going to be no correlation with the lives of the average American, especially the white American, because you're not living in a nation anymore. You are like living in Rome. Now, Rome can last for a long time, but you have to think about like what happened to the martial class. You have to look at and we'll talk about this next episode, what actually forms a nation. It starts with the people, it starts with the blood, it starts with the soil, but there is a tipping point where it's just a runaway train where there is no, what is the martial class? What is the martial ethnicity in America right now? It doesn't exist. The closest we've got are a selection of disaffected whites who are figuring out ways to crowbar their way into the moneyed class. That's all we have. And there's a lot of people on our side who are doing that. There's a lot of people who are trying to kind of rebirth this sort of martial class, but good luck. I think there's a lot of people who are trying to figure out how to like break into the levers of power on our side. I wish them luck too, but I think that's, if you want to like make America, you want to make Canada great again, you want to make America great again, it's like, how many hundreds of years do you want to go back? Because it's not going to be within the last few generations. That wasn't great. That was already on the decline, but it hadn't hit yet. Yeah, and then you can track it. Like you can look at Rome. You can also look at England. Like England by 1550 was filled with rich landowners, homeless former farmers, riots, and centralizing capital owners. And then what happens next? Well, they flee to America. They actually did. That's the story of America. The martial class that was suffocated and chased out of England, they had a rebirth in America. But where else can they flee to now? Really?
Yeah.
Because the exact same thing is happening.
Mars. I mean, I want to legitimately though. Mars is the answer, but I want to. It makes me want to develop some inoculant against the mercantilism impulse, right? Like if you have this pure society that you've saved for the 100th time now in some Dyson sphere somewhere that you finally got away from Earth, how do you prevent it from happening again? Like there has to be a way that we can isolate the features of that evolution of society that causes it to go that direction every time, and we can inoculate our real society, our actual base culture against it. Like, is that a disgust with money? Is it disgust with certain behaviors and traits? Does it mean killing all the Jews? Like, that's a joke, but I mean, that's kind of, it's interesting because like this is everything that we hate about the Jews. But it's not really that we hate the Jews. It's just the Jews are best at doing this thing. Because it's also what we hate about all the shysters in our own society and our own race, right? Even if the Jews weren't here, we'd still have our enemies within our race. And this category would still define them. So actually, categorically, this is the problem.
And this was, Oliver Cromwell got brought up in this book as an example of this new type of man, this new mercantile man who rose to power. He wasn't really an aristocrat. He wasn't a spiritual guy. And the story of Cromwell that we covered before is very interesting. Like he was the guy who let Jews back into England, because the Jews were exiled, and Oliver Cromwell needed financing. He sought financing from these, moneyed Jewish people throughout Europe on the condition that, okay, we're going to help you, but you got to help us get back into England. So Cromwell, effectively let Jews back into England. So that's the story of Jews. They don't really conquer like that. They wait until someone's ready to make a deal with the devil, and then they show up.
Yeah.
They get in, but they're not the ones who really started that. It's these other people who are willing to be treacherous to begin with that kind of open the door for them. What I like about the book is that it shows the corruption of the religion and also the priest class, because at the height of these empires, at the height of, let's say, King Henry VIII, you had the imaginative age before that. And the imaginative age was where spirituality reigns, when everyone's kind of on the same page, and the priest class, it's in the hierarchy, but it's not understood in the traditional monetary hierarchy. But it's balanced. There's no real competition. But by the arrival of King Henry VIII, for example, and the importance of money, it was no longer the martial strength that was the marker of power. The marker of power, so it goes from your ability to hold land and work this, it goes to the accumulation of money. So this new aristocracy rose under King Edward VIII, under Cromwell, and they don't even need the priest class anymore. And that's how the priest class becomes employees of these other power structures. And this would happen, arguably, at the height of these civilizations. So in our society right now, when people say, we need to bring back religion, we need to put religion at a place of prominence. Well, even when the priest class was still arguably in a place of prominence, they were still respected and listened to, they were already subverted. They were already the mouthpieces of these other aristocrats. So you'll end up in a position where, let's elect a bunch of priests from the country. Well, they're just going to be tools because you have not correctly assessed where the real power actually lies. So that's what I'm kind of looking at here. It's like, don't just think that if you add more religion to this, it'll make everything better. Because we got countless examples where the priest class is the first to get bought out and used as a part of this larger machine that people might not even be aware of at that point. That's kind of what we're dealing with right now. People still thinking they can vote. That's what voting is. You're not even looking at the real mechanisms of power, and you're still wondering, like, well, why are all these priests saying strange things? Why are these priests saying what these aristocrats are saying? That's never happened before. Anywho, he's got a quote here. It says, from the Crusades to Waterloo, producers dominated Europe and moneylenders fared hardly. So he's basically saying that no one liked the Jews for the longest time. Then something changes, There's a point where it reaches where they start the rise of the merchant adventurer gave birth to the power of the banker. That's kind of where that leads to. Talking about like these merchant adventurers who go out in the world and come back, but they need financing, this and that, blah, blah, blah. He's got this line here. He kind of charts about he charts the rise of the Rothschilds later in the book because it kind of catches up to present day. He said he uses the Industrial Revolution as the center of this argument. And he's kind of going against this idea of progress. There's this idea that, we invent things and people like the things we invented. That's called industrial progress. But he points out how even steam power, prior to the Industrial Revolution, steam power was around for a long time, but it never caught on. He has a line here that steam power wasn't invented, it was marketed. And inventions marketed through credit and capital were what actually changed everything. So, and that's the story of America too. If you look at, the gold, around the times of the gold rush, there's all these inventions. People invent things all the time. But as we know, with like Edison and Tesla, that's only part of it. How do you get people to know about your invention? How do you get other capital owners to buy into it? So steam power, like how does everyone start getting into steam? Is it, well, you actually need guys to lend you money to popularize it, to show it off, to build these more and more sophisticated machines and to get these things started up. And that's where, financiers and bankers come in. And I like that idea where it's like, you know, once you enter into the realm of commerce, it seems inevitable that you give bankers control. Like then the bankers almost become controllers of that very moneyed class. And
Yeah.
right there is the story of the Rothschilds, just to catch us up to present day.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that industrial revolution effectively killed off the freemen, the yeomen, the martial class. Like there wasn't any more really after that. And that's why, you know, all you have really in the mythology of Americana is like the cowboy. But you would be hard pressed to find someone who would glorify the real early American pioneers. We do it a bit in our scene, but you know, broadly, there's more people who have accepted the foundation myth of America as, you know, a charismatic industrialist who showed up one day or a landowner, or you know, like the myth of this moneyed class for most people sits at the center of American identity rather than perhaps a more true version of the American who carved this nation or that nation, you know, but Canada too carved the nation out of, you know, savagery.
Yeah.
Anyway, that was a bit of a long one, but just I love the central ideas established into this, that there is, we wonder what happened to the imaginative class. Wonder what happened to the spirituality. We wonder what happened to these people who founded a country. Where did they go? And we all we need to do is look to England, look to Rome, look to America. They seem to always fall when confronted with the materialist moneyed class, and arguably it's because these better, healthier families, these men, these groupings, they're not concerned with power. So the people who are concerned with power attain power, and that's arguably where we're still stuck at. You know, like we're trying to find a better way to live, but even now, people like us, we're always gonna keep losing to the more materialistic technocrats. And I think on our side, that was what the NRX movement was. The near reactionary movement was a lot of people who are kind of on the ground at our level, the people who are not aristocrats, the people who are not from wealthy families and have no connections, trying to figure out ways where they could break their way into the true mechanisms of power. And that's kind of what Curtis Yarvin and Mencius Moldbug, that's they're the same guy. I don't mean but yeah, a lot of these other guys, even Nick Land had, like we talked about in the interview with Clossington, he's kind of reserved. He's resignated to him, like, yeah, it's going to happen. We actually don't have any control over this, so buckle up. Anyway, we can end there. What did you think of all that? Was that coherent?
That's great. It actually, of all of them recently, it kind of makes me want to read this, because I am energized by the idea that there seems to be a pretty simple pattern surrounding this, and it's something that, like, it's a pattern that you can kind of identify at least after the fact pretty easily, but it's a blind spot for us generally, not just us, but like all of Western civilization for 4,000 years. It seems to have been a blind spot. So that's a project, right? Can we fix that? Is there something that we can do? Can we inoculate against that? I don't know. That's something to explore.
Do not let the rapists win. Listen and love Blood Satellite.